مساء الخير. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sari Hanafi. I am professor in the Department of Sociology, Anthropology and Media Studies. On behalf of my department and Issam Faris Institute for Public Policy at American University of Beirut, I would like to welcome you all. So it's really a great honor for me today to introduce Francois Burgat, who is not only a dear friend, but also an outstanding researcher who has been focusing mainly on Islamic movements in the Arab world. I have known Francois for more than 20 years. I remember his first encounter in the Centre d'études et de documentation iconomique juridique et sociale, CEDEJ, in Cairo in 1992. After his lecture there, I remember a huge, crowded audience. It's very rare that in Cairo, not a Francophone country, we attract audience, but he was capable to do it. I think he is really one of the rare scholars capable of understanding the Islamic movement without falling into the cliché of romanticizing or vilifying them. While many scholars in France and elsewhere refer to Hassan al-Banna to understand or often to denounce the current Muslim Brotherhood movements, Francois has believed in the historicity of these movements and the tremendous transformation they have undergone. History now gives him reason, as we currently see in the new orientation of Muslim Brotherhood that have won parliamentary majorities in Tunisia and Egypt. He is known for his courage of facing a dominant paradigm with which the French political science has studied the Islamic movements. I remember him in Nantes, my city, where he was really facing Khalida Mas'oudi, one of the Algerian eradicators, what we called in French. She became a minister, so it was not easy when somebody from the place where in a crisis challenged him in that time. I remember him many times in Radio France Culture, challenging Alan Felkenkroot, Alexander Adler. Do you remember, Francois? Yeah, something like that. Okay, so I'm so delighted that he has this kind of courage. His strengths come from his methodology, I think, meticulous and patient fieldwork. Indeed, one cannot apprehend the Islamic movement by simply doing a content analysis of their writing or referring to what the others say about them. He relies in the in-depth interviews and attending some of their convention. He is a political scientist and senior researcher at Centre National de Recherche Scientifique, CNRS. Thanks to Syrian uprising, he is currently based in Beirut. He is the director of a French Institute for the Near East, IFPO. He has been a permanent resident in Middle East and North Africa region for over 20 years, in University of Constantine in Algeria, in CEDEJ, director of French Center for Archeology and Social Sciences in Sanaa, and so on. Finally, he is author of the Islamic Movement in North Africa, his book in University of Texas Press, and Face to Face with Political Islam in IB Tauris, among many other books, specifically in French, and some of them, by the way, translated into Arabic. So today, he will talk about political Islam through Arab revolutions. Please join me in welcoming him.
Merci, Sari, for this precious opportunity to thank you to you and to your department, to your university, for this precious opportunity to be here, to exchange, to increase the number of my friends and probably that of my enemies as well, especially since this will go on air. As you have already noticed, or you will soon, I was born French. So when it comes to giving a lecture in English, I sometimes find myself in kind of a dead-end streets with no linguistic ability to express exactly what I mean. If twice in a row I say something that you do not understand, please raise your hand, bring me back on the path of being understandable. I do not express myself as the head of the French Institute. This has to be said. Okay, the French Institute is more or less related to the French Department of Minister of Foreign Affairs. Of course, I express myself as an individual, not as an institution, as the head of an institution. I happen to find myself opposed to the policies of my home land. I have the feeling of becoming kind of old, since during the last month I found myself several times agreeing with some of the changes in the French foreign policy. I'm glad to address the issue of political Islam, although I'm a little tired of addressing this issue. I think that we over-address it. I think it is not as important as many people, at least outsiders, think it is. This is not the main issue of what is going on in this part of the world. What is going on in this part of the world is a beautiful process by which the state of law is, the level of the state of law is raising, and the level of authoritarianism is lowering. This is the hardcore of what is going on. And now the vocabulary that the political activists use is not a detail, but it should not, we should not focus exclusively on this issue, as ma'al asaf so many of Western observers do. In fact, political Islam is indeed the hero of the Arab Spring, whether we like or not this expression. Because more or less it is behind the fact that it was so easy for dictators to stay in power. Political Islam, if it's not me, it's Al-Qaeda. Then more or less the fact that political Islam disappeared from the frame of the Arab Springs in the first weeks, especially in Tunis, is behind the reason it was so warmly welcomed by the Western opinion. And the fact that political Islam made a dramatic comeback through the polls is also a major issue of what is happening not so far from where we are staying now, for instance, to take one example. I should, in theory, I should concentrate on the variable religieuse, but before I go into political Islam, I would like to briefly allow you to know my understanding of where do we come from? Where does the Arab Spring come from? What was the background? What was the situation of the societies like Tunis, or Libya, or Egypt? Let's concentrate on this part of the world. When this process not started but accelerated. I like very much. I have a few heroes in the Arab world. One of them is Taraq al-Bishri. I quoted again and again and again what Bishri wrote in 1990. At a time when every single commentator would say the Islamic thrust is menacing the Arab world, he would come and say that what the menace was the fact that the political systems in this part of the world were not functional, that there was no link between what was recognized, acknowledged as legal by the law, and that was really existing. That the institutional expression of the resistance of the society to the authoritarian regime was not functional. And he puts it this way, he says, a system that no longer allows the real political dynamics to flow through its veins or shrinks its arteries to the point of obstruction paves the way for secret organizations and clandestine groups. When a political system tolerates such a dichotomy between legality and reality, between law and opinion, then it is a real schizophrenia which threatens the functioning of the entire society. If I was to summarize the situation of the political situation of all of Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, Egypt, let's stay in North Africa, I would say this is the hardcore of the situation. The real political forces are not allowed to have an institutional base and a legal way of expression. Another way to put it, a little more radical, is to say that the institution linked to repression slowly, more or less, play the role of those who should allow the representation. Repression versus instead of representation. Torture. I keep on saying if you at that time would give a talk on the political system in this part of the world, you do not pronounce the word torture, you miss something. Because at the end of the repression in all of these political systems, there was, one would go beyond the limit of physical integrity. Now, why did it last so long? Did authoritarianism add resources other than its use of violence? Yes, it had, at a local level, at an international level. I have said that more or less political Islam was some kind of hero of the Arab Springs. It is because, indeed, the Islamic menace has been a good reason for Europe in general, France to a certain extent in particular, to support the most radical dictators in all of this part of the world. One must say, and I will not have only friends at the end of the conference, that also inside the Arab societies there was at least a fringe, not all, political heroes, Arab political heroes, in my understanding, were those who were against the Islamists, but nevertheless would not support the vicious emotional discourse giving legitimacy to the fact that they should be eradicated. I remember having a very hot argument in France 5 or 6 years ago when I was opposed to the discourse of the very radical fringe of the North African leftist. I was said by someone that I was not respecting the heroes of the politics in North Africa. And I said, they are not the heroes. They are not my heroes. I would at that time mention l'Union Tunisienne des Femmes Démocratiques. And I said, I'm sorry, but in my understanding, they do not represent more than 5% of the society. And I was almost kicked out of the room. And we go back to this statistic. I said, my heroes are those who signed the Saint-Egidio Agreement. Saint-Egidio Agreement, I don't know whether it makes sense for you, in 1995, in the midst of the Algerian Civil War, Louisa Hanoun, let's say to make it simple, miniskirt, Trotskyist lady, accepted to shake hand with Anwar Haddam, the Bardid representative of Jabhat al-Inqadh. And although they had a different understanding, a different history, a different imaginaire politique, they say, okay, we are different, but we agree to do a little path together on the base of our sharing common values of respect. So authoritarianism was allowed to last so long because it was supported from outside and to a certain extent from inside. This is for the background of where the spring will start. Now, at the theoretical level, what is the structure of the Arab Spring? We start with this very symbolic moment when Ben Ali moves away, or Mubarak, the symbolic identification of the system, leaves. Irhal, and it comes to a result. But it's not the end. It is only a beginning. Then we move into the second step. The second step is very complicated. Those who have the power, those who had the power, and in Egypt, those who still have the power, the militaries, have to decide how much of this power they will allow others to take from the poles. So there is a battle inside the system to rebuild the constitutional frame and to decide the rules by which the country will function, and the resources will be allocated to political activists of all tendencies. And then the third step is that the Poles decide what will be the color or the tendency, the strategy of those who will run the country. Now, these last two steps are mingled, are intermingled, since we already, for instance, in Tunis, we know the color of the political forces, because inside the process of renewing the constitution, we already know who is going, what is the balance of forces. And in Egypt, we already know the parliament at a time when we do not know what the majority will be allowed to do. So it is intricate, it is complicated, but basically these are the three steps. The rhythm of these springs has been affected by two main variables. The place of the army, the way the army behaved. You do know that it is totally different in Tunis than it is in Egypt. And the army in Tunis is just like a regular civil servant army at a time when in Egypt it is part not only of the government but of the economy. They are the first landowner in Egypt, for instance, etc., etc. So the way the army is linked to the society, the way it will behave is a major variable. The second one is, of course, internationalization. In both Egypt and Tunis, we may say, I know you are allowed to disagree, that it has not been a major variable. Not a major. It was there, of course, but not a major. It has been a major variable in Libya. And it is also a major variable in a country not so far from here. It can be a major variable which helps and fuels the opposition. It can be a major variable for the sake of the regime. Okay, so this is why the rhythm of this process of moving away from authoritarianism is different from one country to the other. Now, what about political Islam? When I address an audience in France, but it makes sense to say it elsewhere, I express my feeling that there was what I call un angle mort, or a trompe-l'œil, dead angle, a blind angle, would you say, in the dominant understanding of the Arab Springs in the first weeks. And to illustrate this, I suggest that you Google a poster which was used. We have every month of September in France, the French Communist, but in a sense where the French Communist Party has a broader way of representing the entire left and more than the left under these present circumstances. The annual festival of the Parti communiste français, la Fête de l'Humanité, in September 2011 wanted to celebrate the Arab Spring. So they issued a poster. And this poster, what does this poster represent? It represents what has come out of the Arab Spring, you know, of this delicious, beautiful page of history. Is it a male or a female? It is a female, of course. We, the French, have a tendency, when we address an issue in the Muslim world, we'd rather speak to the ladies than to the men. It's like a kind of tradition of French foreign policy. We have a secret weapon, which is not so well known, but which is terribly efficient, at least we think it is. We menace he who opposes us to liberate his wife. You know? And so there is constantly this discourse through French history, in Algeria, for instance, at the end of the colonial period, we were explaining to Algerians that it was very important for us to stay as a colonial power because we were doing so many good things for the sake of their liberty and freedom. So, of course, the symbol of the Arab Spring was a lady. Of course, she was not an old lady, she was a young lady. But now, how was she dressed? Well, she was dressed like a lady whom you could not imagine that she would belong to the Muslim world, of course. So she was a lady with beautiful long hair. No problem. Little problem since there was a decoration in her hair. And the decoration was the flags of all these countries around the Mediterranean Sea, including, of course, the flag of the country south of Lebanon. So, you know, the symbol of the creation by the Arab Spring of new political activists in the Mediterranean was a young lady who had no connection with Muslim culture and who was a good friend of the State of Israel. I think this more or less summarizes the mistake in the understanding of the first weeks of the Tunisian Spring. What happened exactly? What happened is that, as I said, the traditional political forces, the institutionalized political forces in this area of the world were not functional. They were either tired or absent, in exile or too old, but they were not left or right Islamist or unions. They were not in a state of mobilizing society efficiently. This is one of the reasons why, and it is a good reason, it was a very positive factor. This is why none of the official political forces was involved in the first weeks of the mobilization. The society expressed itself without any reference to any of the political ideologies which had prevailed or been existing in this part of the world. There were no Dawla Islamiyya, but they were neither red flag. They were only the widest common denominator of the entire society, dignity, liberty, arhal. And this is what gave probably to this mobilization part of its strength. But it also led the observers, especially the Western observers, to a very weak conclusions. The wishful thinking of the West brought them to say, hey, the Islamists have disappeared. There's not one single Islamist in the landscape, and go into the front pages of many of the newspapers. There was not any kind of slogan against Israel or against the West. It was like a brand new rebirth of the politics in North Africa. For this reason, there was this idea that those who did the revolution, they were the Twitter generation or the Facebook generation, which is not wrong, but there was an over-assessment of a mechanism which has mistaken those who have, by the way, someone who uses a computer is not of a specific ideology. like many people think in the West. He's using a computer, therefore he cannot be an Islamist. No, he can be any brand of the political landscape. There is absolutely no antinomy. So the idea was that the generation who made the Arab Springs was the ideal good friend of the West, and not only of the West, but his closest ally in the Middle East. Of course, what had happened in reality is what I said, is that it is true, and I can quote you something maybe you do not know, but like 2 weeks before in Tunis, the Islamists issued an internal report saying that the regime was in great shape and that there was absolutely no reasons to think that it would be weakened in the year to come. They were absolutely not, no one was confident in the idea that there would be a revolution in just days after, okay? So the entire society expressed itself using a vocabulary which was not ideologized. And this is very, very important. And this has given this positive image of this protest throughout the West. Now, of course, very soon, there were signs that the society was expressing itself again along old compartments of ideologies, and it became soon this wishful thinking of the West was not only in the media. Here I have to open, Bain Qawsayn, say something vicious to at my colleagues, but main analysts also wrote that the Islamists had disappeared from the political landscape. And one of the major French ones said, answering the question of a journalist, sir, yes, they have disappeared, but they might, come back through the polls. And he says, and he wrote, poor of him, he wrote, who in this part of the world will ever again cast a vote for those who were not here at the time of the revolution. So everyone was convinced that they had completely disappeared. And of course, it became soon clear that the story was a little different. What happened exactly is that they were absent in Tunis, absolutely no question. In Egypt, they were divided. The Ikhwan Muslimin, the old guard of Ikhwan Muslimin, were afraid of being accused of having an insurrectional attitude because they had been mistreated along this line for so many years. And the very first days of the protest, the regime tried and put the blame on Ikhwan Muslimin. So they were very careful. But the young part of the young generation of Ikhwan Muslimin started to disobey to a certain extent, and they moved in very clearly, and they were there in Tahrir. And then the society took its rhythm. And what happened? The political forces which had been expelled from the legal arena for years moved back in. Absolutely no surprise. The only little surprise is that people of the Islamist range who had expelled themselves from the political arena, the Salafists, moved back in. And there was indeed a surprise when we were in a situation to discover that they had taken such an amount of voices to Ikhwan Muslimin. Probably because Ikhwan Muslimun had lost their political virginity, oppositional virginity. They were no longer considered as this is another interpretation, you will put it in later on, that they had lost some of their credit as opponents since they had been so weak facing the regime for the last 25 years. But there was no major surprise. Now, what is the impact of this process of moving back into the legal area for the political Islam all throughout this area. And beyond the fact that the mainstream, basically Ikhwan al-Muslimun, will be in the system and probably close to power, majority in Egypt, but before you say they do not have the majority in Tunis, do not forget that Sheikh Rashid said that he did not want to have majority and looked very close to the party of the President of the Republic, Monsef Marzouki, and see who exactly are the members of the party and how close they are to political Islam. So I would say more or less even majorité relative or majorité absolue, you translate, majorité relative? Relative majority or absolute majority. I do not trust myself enough. I do not resist to telling you my favorite joke when it comes to translating into English. It's an old one, you know it by heart, but it was in Harvard and I was giving a lecture and this guy from Iraq said, Francois, whenever you miss one word and you are facing an American audience, you say it very slowly in French, facing them, and they will feel, my God, this is the last Bourdieu's concept and we do not know it. So I don't want to be very vicious, but if I find myself in a bad situation, I will say it in French.
Just flip the words.
Yeah, or flip the word and it will we go back to Latin. Now, what is the impact on political Islam as a whole? Okay, the mainstream has to adapt to the situation of power. But let me, because I want to leave more time for discussion, let me say my theory of what happens to the radical trend. It has been constantly written that, at least in French literature, I don't know if it was so much said in Anglo-Saxon literature, but you know, Ben Laden has been killed twice. Once by the SEALs and once by the Arab Springs. Because the Arab Springs have kind of demonstrated that his strategy was not the good one, and the peaceful strategy was the good one, and that the Arab masses were totally disconnected of his radical demands. I kindly disagree with this. You did not you mentioned my most recent book. It's not political, face-to-face with political Islam. It's Islamism in the shadow of Al-Qaeda. So in this Islamism in the shadow of Al-Qaeda, which is at the University of Texas Press, I went into what is Al-Qaeda? Where did it come from? And I said, to my understanding, Al-Qaeda is the expression of a triple dysfunctioning of political institutions. Or to make it very simple, I would say, Al-Qaeda is the result of the triumph of hard power over politics, political institution regulations at three levels. The global level, the Israeli-Arab conflict level, and the national Arab political arena level. And I have another way to put it when I want to be really provocative. I say Al-Qaeda is a response to the American jihadism and to the Israeli jihadism, and also to the misfunctioning of those whom I labeled as Arab Pinochets. Arab Pinochets in the sense illegitimate regimes whom we allow to survive because they send us good signals at an economic level. So what is new in the Arab Springs? Arab Pinochets are moving out of the landscape. It is very important. If I am a young activist in the Arab world, well, let's hope that we come to the end of the process where local, national political institutions gain credibility. I have a choice. I can become MP in parliament. I can act inside my country with some hope that it will affect the balance of forces and the decision-making process. So it is true. I have at least one good reason not to move to the radical way of hitting the enemy, l'ennemi lointain. How do you say? the faraway enemy. So it is true that the radical trend of the Islamic movement has lost at least one support, the fact that local system has gained political institutional efficiency. But what about Israeli jihadism? What about US jihadism? They are still doing well, perfectly well. There is no significant change that would diffuse my idea that if I want to be really efficient, I should remind them that they should taste some of the violence which they pour upon the people in this area of the world. So I'm not so, I don't know if you may say optimistic to the extent that I would support the idea that the Arab Spring has diffused la problématique de transnational armed groups. And of course, we have more or less, although this is very obscure event in France, that reminds us that the process, if we want, in 1995, we, the French, were the target of blind bombing in the metro Saint-Michel. Now, Bain Qawsain, it happens that we know that those who have put the bomb were not those who thought were. Probably not all of you know, because it was not written and said so clearly and so loudly, but we know that this bombing of Saint-Michel came from authorities or secret services on the south part of the Mediterranean and not from activists in the north part. Sorry?
You are like us.
Yeah. But, you know, let's forget this. But at that time I had written an article, and those who get French, it has been translated in English, but I had written La recette du poseur de bombe. And La recette du poseur de bombe was to say, if you want to stop the process of radicalization, you must put your hand on this guy who lays bombs. But that's the first step only. Then you must deconstruct, understand what is the process which creates people who are willing to use this type of political language. And if you go into this process, you will be surprised. You will not find only Muslims in the lousy suburbs. You will find nice people in the most wealthy areas of the French capital. My idea is that understanding that there is a process of radicalization which has not stopped, has not been understood in France. And if we take only one example of the dichotomy, basically the misrepresentation of the Muslim community in France. The fact that if I am Muhammad, I cannot do exactly what Michel or David can do. And let's take one very simple example. If David wants to fly tomorrow to Tel Aviv, join the Israeli army, enter territories which we know from international law that they are illegally occupied, and shoot people, he may do so in full Republican legality and legitimacy. Now, if Muhammad wants to express more than a vocal support to those who stop the bullets, if he has the lousy idea of traveling toward Afghanistan or Iraq to help his co-believers face what he looks at as an illegal aggression, he will be immediately demonized, criminalized, considered jihadist and Fudala. And of course, if you put on top of this the issue of the hijab, the issue of the halal, the issue of the prayers in the street, you have a machinery which produces this type of radicalization. If you put on top of it the fact that the only reaction of the state until now is that you will no longer be allowed to go on your computer to open the page of a book which will tell you something that you feel should be said, a radical discourse. You know that I am afraid that radicalization from so-called political Islam has some future. I was reading not later than this morning on one of those websites which it is prohibited to read from now on. If you read it twice, once it's okay, twice you might go to jail. A young radicalized man who said, I have a computer and a sword. If you take my computer, don't you ever worry that I'm going to use the sword. Now, I wanted to be optimistic. I don't know if I've been, but I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Francois, for this provocative and enlightening talk. And I'm sure the floor will react in different way. I forgot to greet our Finnish delegation here, student delegation. They are at EUB since I think yesterday, and so we will give you specifically the floor if you want to have any questions, students. So I open the floor. Okay, Tanya, can you take the 1 minute? Okay. So we collect.
Okay, all the questions. Better. How was the language? Language was all right?
Sorry?
Language was all right?
Excellent.
Well, my name is Adel Cortaz. I was the Minister of Agriculture of Lebanon long time ago. Now, I like your presentation very well, and I would like to make some comments and ask some questions. First, I am not afraid at all about this uprising, spring uprising. I don't think that all these Salafist or Muslim fanatics are going to be worse than what is being done in a country like Saudi Arabia, where Wahhabism has been there for many, many years. Besides the point that when they will be in power, they have to change their attitudes. Take a country like Tunisia, where Bourguiba was able to have monogamy instead of polygamy, and I don't think that we will be able to change that. Now, a third point is related to the expectations. We are raising the expectations too much of the population. But when they will be in power, they will not be able to achieve everything they have in mind or they are preparing for. Therefore, if you can elaborate on these 3 points, I would be very grateful to you. Thank you very much.
I will collect some questions. Okay, Ambassador of the Finnish, Your Excellency. Okay.
Thank you. My question is short and simple in the following way. What might be the role of political Islam in the Syrian conflict? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Hussein Abu Naml.
In the Syrian?
Revolution, uprising.
I have one point. I hear that you say that my interest is that the Islamist movement lost their political virginity. I think that the problem is not here. The change which happened they have a new viewpoint. They try to read the policy, sociology, even Islamic, from another point of view. So they do not change from ideology or to policy, no. They have the same ideology, the same policy, but through a new way of thinking toward what is the meaning of policy, what is the meaning of ideology. And I think there's a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you. George, here, please. Okay, and I will give you the...
Yeah, okay, Samir.
Thank you. Well, in my mind...
Present yourself just
yeah,
for...
I am George Kosaifi. In my mind, there is no one political Islam. You see, we have different currents in political Islam. It may, if we want to link between political Islam, Marxism, liberalism, Arab nationalism, etc., you may find all currents here. You see, we can mention Ali Shariati, for example. We can mention Tariq Bushri as examples of enlightened Islamists, and we may mention Al-Qaeda as a very Salafist, etc., etc. Now, how do you think that it may depend from one country to another? The different Islamists, current Islamists, how are they going to behave in terms of policy, political, especially vis-a-vis relation with Israel and the West in general, in terms of economic policies, the role of the state, etc., vis-a-vis the public-private sector, etc., etc. So there is no, in my mind, one political Islam. There are too many political Islams, and I believe all intellectual or honest people should stand by supporting the enlightened Islam. Thank you.
We will give Ahmed Dalal and then just Ahmed Dalal. Okay.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Whoever takes power will have to deal with massive challenges, not least of which is the persistence of authoritarianism and the possibility of a comeback. But there are many, many other challenges. In your view, is there something unique that might characterize the way that Islamists or political Muslims would deal with these challenges, which is different from others, or would it more or less be the same?
I'm so disappointed by these questions. Usually I have to face, aggressions from the audience. And I find myself in a very comfortable situation answering to most of them. I didn't have a chance. This is probably the first time when I address an audience and speak about political Islam that I do not even summarize my frame of analyzing political Islam. Because, of course, I fully, totally, completely agree with what you have said, sir, except that I've written it for the last 25 years, 1,100 times, under different ways. But how do I address the issue of political Islam? I say we must disconnect two levels of analysis, two different questions. Why is it that in this part of the world, if you want to be efficient in the field of political mobilization nowadays, you better put the name of Islam in your party. You better speak Muslim. If you do not speak Muslim, there is a chance that you will not be so functional, so efficient in terms of mobilizing masses. That's the first question. The answer is, I would say, rather easy. Why? Because the symbolic system of the Muslim culture has been, through the colonial period, and even with the post-colonial elites, kind of marginalized, folklorized. It was no longer expected to produce universality. It was marginalized. It is coming back. Speaking Muslim is not speaking religious. It is using a homemade vocabulary. So basically my main point in all my works has been to say the reason behind the capacity of mobilization of the Islamic reference, it is not its religiosity, it is its endogeneity. It is the fact that it is homemade. So speaking Muslim is reconnecting with the culture of my grandfather, beyond the violence of the intrusion of the Western symbolic system. Okay? Now, when I decide that I will speak Muslim, that I will take from the reservoir of my Turath and not from the reservoir of the culture which has been more or less imposed on my society through the colonial period, how do I behave? Am I going to be like this, like that? Am I going to be liberal? Am I going to be conservateur? Am I going to be pacifist? Am I going to be bellicist? The answer is very simple. I do not know. Because the reason is not behind the fact that I speak Muslim. The reason is behind the way I am treated at a local, regional, international level. Whether I am respected or not, I can make you an extremist in just days or probably hours. You know, I hit you on the head to the extent that you fight back at me. And I say, hey, this guy is a Lebanese integrist, fundamentalist. Okay? This has been the way it's been working for so long time. We put the blame on the vocabulary of the activist instead of going into the root causes of their behavior. Okay? Now, what would be the specificity of an Islamic policy in my categories of understanding? It is only the fact that the ability to mobilize is superior to that of those who are using categories of a symbolic system which is perceived as imposed from outside. But I cannot go further. And if someone goes further and tell me what is an agricultural Islamic policy, he is a cheater. He does not know. So the only specificity of the Islamists in this period of history is that their ability to mobilize appears to be a little higher than the ability to mobilize using the secularist, hardliner, secularist vocabulary. Let's take a close look at the Tunisian elections. I told you that I had to face so many times ladies in Europe saying, in the name of Muslim ladies, in the name of Tunisian ladies, I tell you that we should slaughter every single Islamist. There will be no democracy before that. This type of discourse, the very radical anti-Islamic discourse, in the Tunisian polls, has failed to mobilize more than 3% of the votes. More than 3%. Every of those parties which have raised above the level of the ground were not anti-Islamic mobilization. They were en apesanteur. They were either with the Islamists, like those who built the coalition, or they were not against. They were different from the Islamists. But those who have made founded their legitimacy upon the discourse, the radical anti-Islamic discourse, they have failed gaining more than 3% of the votes. This is a lesson for the entire European Union, which for years has been completely disconnected. When I look at Finland, I have some sympathy. Because Finland, when they reached when you reach European Union, you asked me to come and you said, when you reached the presidency of Islamic Union, European Union, there was a program, we were asked to decide who were the Islamists who could be addressed in the southern Mediterranean. And there's been a book and it's been published so you can find it. For so many years, and you can find this in an article in International Politics, the difficulty to to address the other, which I gave for the European Parliament in 2006. And I said that the problem of Europe is that they address the civil society, but they have a very simple concept of civil society. Civil society is the society where there is no hijab and no bearded men. And this was the definition. And there was, of course, a problem. So being Islamic is not a social scientific concept. Political Islam can go with Taliban and also with Erdogan. And it goes all the way in between. And we absolutely agree with this. So yes, indeed, there is no concept, there is no clear answer, scientific answer of what is an Islamist, okay? An Islamist is someone who feels more comfortable when he uses the Islamic terminology to express himself and to mobilize. But in which direction he will mobilize, this is another story we cannot write. Before we go and into very specific, if I am an Islamist occupied militarily by Israelis, I will have a tendency to use my gun. If I am an Islamist in an open, I remember Rashid Ranouchi saying, if you want to know what the Muslims are, don't go, this was 20 years ago, don't go into Kuwait or Tunis or Algeria, go to the west coast of the United States. He didn't say that he was considering the US as a perfect model, but he said the Muslim, when he lives in a peaceful environment, will not behave himself like he behaves himself in Gaza, for instance. I totally agree, sir, with what you said. If you probably read one day some of my works, you will see that I have been attacked because I was saying what you have said. I was refusing to demonize the Islamic movement, and I would show that especially since they were raising in an environment which was Ben Ali or the Algerian generals or Mubarak, it was very difficult to imagine that they would do worse than the regimes they were facing, or worse than other regimes which are considered Islamist. But you know, there is, in the Western terminology, there are two categories. The dictator is a dictator only if he opposes us. If he goes along with our policy, he is not a dictator. Who is le dictateur soumis et le dictateur rebelle? Soumis? Submitted to the sense that so we like le dictateur subjugated, yeah. But we oppose the dictateur rebelle.
Rebellion,
yeah.
dictator.
The very difficult question. In Syria, well, in every single country of this part of the world, as long as we are in a Muslim environment, of course, if I am dealing with Christian or non-Muslim communities, what I'm saying doesn't make sense. But in a Muslim environment in 2012, from Morocco to Iraq, I would say that the majorities belong to political Islam. Now, when I have said political Islam, I have said nothing. I will say majorities will express themselves using Muslim terminology. Now, will there be radicals? Will there be Taliban or Erdogan? I have the feeling that in Syria, they are much closer to Erdogan than to the Taliban. But absolutely no question, the majority of the Sunni population, which is the demographic majority, is close to, is naturally using the religious terminology to express itself. But, and I lived there and I was very close to this situation, they keep, whenever you meet with someone, they keep explaining you that there is no religious strife going on. and that الشعب السوري واحد واحد واحد. This is the base of the communication of the people when they oppose the repression. I think that is all.
Okay, so I will give the first two students raise hands. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so both. Okay, please. Okay, and then Marlene and there and Dr. Marwan. Okay, please.
So I'm Dana Abu Sha'ra. I have a question. Are we assuming that the people who are now confronting reforms and political reforms, are we assuming that they are not ready to take their own beliefs into the public? Are we assuming that religion must be used as means to really convince people of new reforms and to supervise them? This is my question. Thank you.
Please.
You tell me again the first question.
Hi, my name is Valérie Guillemot. I have a question on Syria too. In your opinion, what is the extent of opportunities jihadists have in Syria currently?
Okay. There.
Thank you very much for your talk, first of all. I totally agree with you with your analysis on Islamophobia and in Europe. But you enter after in a sort of Orientalism in reverse, as you know, by saying, for example, that if a woman doesn't have long hair, she cannot be associated with the Muslim culture. So would you have only one girl say, there's only one way of being Muslim? First of all, and as you said, saying indigenous culture, so it means that if you don't speak in a Muslim way, you're not from this culture. So would we say in South America that someone that doesn't speak through Christian or in Europe through Christian way is not from indigenous culture? So this is an issue because Leila Shahid, Sohab Shara, Fadwa Suleiman are much part of the Muslim world than anyone else, weird or not. So this is the first issue. And after, the issue also of political Islam saying that they're hero of the Arab Spring is that they were absent because they didn't address any of the many issues of the Arab people. And it wasn't religious discourse that was mobilizing the people. This is, it wasn't Islam al-Hal. No, it was Tunis al-Hal. In Egypt, there's people saying Tunis is the solution, not Islam. Mm-hmm. So mobilization was not made through Islam. So your analysis is a bit flawed on this issue. And the problem with the Arab Spring is that on democracy, the issue with the Muslim Brotherhood, that they don't want full democracy. They've been collaborating with the army in Egypt, and Tunis being against the UGTT and mobilization for social issues. On social issues, they don't challenge past European agreements. So they're not enemy of the West at all. On the opposite, they've been collaborating with the West. Imperialist issues, on the opposite, they want peace with Israel. So how can you say that the mobilization is going to be, we've seen the opposite. So it's a bit to challenge this analysis. Thank you very much.
Good question. There will be too much. Let me remember I'm old.
Thank you. I'm Marwan Kredi. I'm a visiting professor at AUB. I think one of the most interesting things that you said tonight was that the uprisings do not constitute the beginning of protests, but the continuation and expansion and acceleration of protest. And to my mind, when you think of protest over the past several years in the Arab world, I think of the labor movement in Tunisia, in Egypt, to some extent. And yet the labor movement does not seem to be on the political map after the elections. It's a very small part of the new political landscape. What do you think the future is to the labor movement in a polity that is dominated by a variety of stripes of political Islam, knowing that, for instance, it seems to me that the dominant groups, whether it's the Brotherhood in Egypt or others, are very capitalist. And so the issue of non-ideological, I think, needs to be contextualized in this way. So in a new environment that's dominated by a religious idiom and by a capitalist ideology, where do you see the place of the labor movement, at least in North Africa?
Allow me to...
Yeah, last question, myself and Marlene.
Is it possible that the tendency in the European culture to demonize Islam has brought you to over-idealize it? Not that I don't consider, I do consider that it is a very important cultural part of our civilization, of our Arab civilization, the Arab Islam. It's not the Indonesian, neither the Chinese or the South African. No, it's a different component of Islam. I do recognize that it is an important part of our culture. But don't you have a tendency to essentialize it, to make it very like an essence and or something very idealistic, going to the opposite of the demonization? This is I do agree with your analysis, but it's a little bit black and white. Yeah. Second question, do you have an idea how could be the policy of the actual Islam in power in the 3 or 4 countries that are new in this, sharing the policy and the system towards the jihadists, what you call US jihadism and Israeli jihadism? Do you have an idea how, or do you think that they have a possibility to, not to oppose, but to deal with these 2 jihadism? Or what about their dealing with European financial opportunism? Thank you.
Last question for me as a chair. I have a methodology question to you. How would you distinguish between leaders' discourse and more in lower level? Because we know there is discrepancies between leaders addressing themselves in an eloquent way to researcher, to media, even authentic with themselves, and the mass, which is very different. I do remember in 1990, it was a lecture of Rashid al-Ghannouchi in Strasbourg, where he was very clear about democracy, that the democracy it's an end, that it's not a means, it's an end by itself. And then when we went to dinner with a small group of student Islamist movement, they told him, say, come on, we hope you say that for the public relation and for a French audience, and not for us. I mean, how come can we allow a kafir to become president, etc.? So we have these discrepancies. So how would you address it in your research? Okay.
The old story of the double standard discourse. I'm glad that you asked these hardcore questions because there probably is a little misunderstanding. I am not saying the norm. I am not a mufti. I am not saying this is good Islam or this is good, or this lady with such a hair is the good one and the one with the hijab is the bad one, or the opposite. I just acknowledge trends which go through the societies where I have been living for the last 23 years. And I acknowledge the fact that political mobilization which ignores the will of a majority of the people to use the symbolic system of the Muslim culture to express themselves fail in the elections or have a chance to be less efficient than others. My question, the questions I had to answer is, why is it that the Islamists more and more gain some kind of popularity in this area of the world? It's not, are they good or bad? All I had to try and explain is, why is it that every year one explains me that the Islamists, the ladies do not like them, the kids do not like them, the militaries do not like them, the Sufis do not like them, etc. And at the end of the day, they are still here. So I need an explanation which is a little stronger. If you move, and this was my privilege, from an Arab country to the other, you are in Algeria, say, oh, political Islam, you know how this happened to us. We made a huge mistake. We brought in Egyptians to teach Arabic, and boom, they brought in political Islam. Then you move to Egypt, as I did, and say, oh, my friend, no such thing in Egypt. But you know, we sent our workers to the Gulf, and they came back with this stupid idea of wearing the hijab. Then you go to the Gulf, and you are explained very seriously, we are not far enough from Iran, you know. So this was, there was, and no. And I'm sorry about the intelligentsia of the left in the Arab world, but no one faces the root causes of the process, and he wants to blame the neighbor or a radicalized version of the process. I am not saying that the lady without a veil is bad. I am saying that for the Western opinion, it is the symbol of the component of the society which do not frighten them. That's what I was saying. I'm not saying, you know, in my guts, I do not feel close to a lady wearing a niqab. I tell you, between you and me. But as an analyst, I cannot use this type of frame. So what I am saying is not that the lady with the hijab is right or wrong, but or the lady without the hijab is right or wrong. I'm just acknowledging the fact that there are more, even in secularist Syria, ladies wearing the hijab, and I have to do with this. And I have to make a point when I see that when the West wants to represent the good side of the non-Western society, he will choose a lady not wearing the hijab. That was my only point. I know that the left in the Arab world face a very difficult situation, especially when it comes to, for instance, the crisis in Syria. Western diplomacies for years have supported dictatorship in North Africa. All of a sudden, with some cynism, they have 180 degrees changed their mind, changed their strategy. And now they are supporting this movement who oppose the authoritarian regimes. Now, there is a reactive tendency among some leftist activists throughout Europe and the Arab world to say, since President Sarkozy supports this movement cannot be good, so I have to support he who opposes this movement. I think it is dangerous. If my worst enemy says, I like swimming in AUB's swimming pool, which is my idea for...
I didn't allow him because he is not a member.
Okay. Then I will not decide that I am not going to do so, because my worst enemy does so. And I'm afraid that we have been facing the situation of people saying, I am going to support the authoritarian regimes because their opposition is supported by all these very conservative regimes in the Middle East, plus the Western diplomacies. When it comes to say the Islamists are so close to the United States that we may think that they are close to Israel, and this I've heard so many times, I have a question. How do you put Hamas and how do you put Hezbollah in this frame? If Ikhwan al-Muslimun definition is to be ready to move in the support of Israel, you have to explain me how do you link those two political forces to political Islam, which they are representatives. The future of the labor, it's a big question. Once again, there is no antinomy, in my understanding, there is no antinomy between the agenda of the unions and political Islam. Once again, let's say, what is my definition of political Islam? I have written 20 years ago, political Islam is not the appearance of one ideology. It is the result of the process which reconnects the entire terroir of production of political ideologies to the symbolic system of the Islamic culture. So from this reconnecting of the Islamic culture with the political discourse, there can be all kinds of brands of policies. So once again, I do not know what an Islamic political economy is. I know what is the trend, the main trend in Ikhwan Muslimin in Egypt in 2012. Yeah, okay, they are liberals. They are not communists, no question. But there is no such explanation that it is an Islamic way of expressing themselves in the economic field. So I cannot build the categories of antagonizing the labor, the future of labor forces and Islamism. I told you that you ought to have left me more time to respond. Yeah. Do I idealize? I think I have already answered. I am not a mufti. I am not saying the norm. I am only acknowledging the fact that the process, and this is one of the hardcore of what I've been writing about political Islam, the process of repositioning toward the West, which is the root of political movement in this part of the world. Repositioning toward the West after the colonial encounter. This process of repositioning toward the West, which has expressed itself in the limits or at a political level. You are sitting on my chair. Go back, you French. I want to be Algerian. I want to have a different flag. Independence. Has moved to the economic level. Hey, you French, you took the key of the oil fields. You took the key of the Suez Canal. Bring it back. Nationalization. We got mad. How did we answer to the nationalization process in 1956? We went to war. This process, which has expressed itself at a political level, then at an economical level, has moved. It's not, of course, just like in a waterproof series of activities, but is moving, has moved at the symbolic level, at the cultural level, and it makes that societies feel more at ease when they express themselves using a terminology or a symbolic system which identifies them as different of the West. This is my frame of analysis. I'm not saying whether it's good or not. And if we go further, I never move to the field of values. You will never hear me saying Muslim values. So I do not over-ideologize. There is no, in my understanding, Muslim values or Western values. There's only a terminology which makes these values legitimate in my group, whether I take them or not, in this reservoir of symbolic material which I consider I am in relation with. So if I am a communist in the 50s and I want to support social justice, I will say, since Lenin said. If I am a Christian, I will say, since Jesus said. And if I am a Muslim, I will say, since Al-Quran al-Karim said or wrote. Now, if I am a Muslim and I say, since Lenin said, it does not work. And to a certain extent, it has not worked for some time. The process of modernization has not worked because at least the majority, it does not mean that there are no other components. But what I look at, the majority felt more at ease when it was listening to a political discourse which was mobilizing symbolic material perceived as extracted, even if this is completely ideological, perceived as extracted from the local Turath. This is what I've been saying, and I think the gentleman has to say a counter remark because I see that he does not fully appreciate. But so this is my point. Once again, I am not over romanticizing, since I go against my Muslim friends very often. If they say, Francois, you speak Arabic, you do not criminalize the Muslims as your brothers do, why don't you, move a little bit forward and you become a Muslim? Now, if you go as late as in 1999, where I was the hero of Bila Hudud in Al Jazeera with Ahmed Mansour, and I was very proud of being this pioneer of this nice program. I said to him, I have a problem with both my Western friend and my Muslim friends. My Muslim friends, they say, hey, Burgat, he has become a Muslim. But my Muslim friends, they say, hey, are you sure you don't want to become a Muslim? What is the problem of these two positions? Is that they deny the fact that above the level of the primary belonging, there can be a level of universality, which do not requires the material of the primary belonging. So, therefore, I do not have the feeling that I have become indigenized or something. No, I keep away. I can hit very strongly on both sides of the road. I am not buying the theology of my Muslim friends. Therefore, I don't think I'm so badly endangered. Thank you so much.
Well, yeah, with the word of universalism, and you know how dear to me this word, and you did really very good, that on behalf of our provost, Ahmed Dalal, we will offer you membership in the swimming pool for 1 day. Do you agree, Ahmed? No, 30, yes. No, not for life. Okay, so on behalf of Assam Faris Institute and the Department of Sociology, Anthropology and Media Study, I would like to thank you of participating in this talk, okay, and thank specifically our guest, Francois Burgat. Thank you. Excellent.
Merci.
This must